Really excited to have Marty Moore with us today. Marty, how you doing?
Hey, Randy, doing great, mate. How are you?
Excellent, thank you. He is part of a group called your CEO Mentor, and when I asked him his title, he said the no bullshit leader. So that's probably a one-time only title anywhere. So that's great. And he's also a best-selling author, and definitely will have a lot of great insights for us today. For those that are members of Sales Community, thanks. For those that are not, Tucker put up a link. You can get a free membership using this link. And we're sponsored by Sandler, who's our sales training sponsor of Sales Community. They've been around, forever, thousands, probably tens of thousands of customers, but really have some unique insight and a great portfolio of kind of inexpensive low touch, expensive high touch around kind of all the different facets and needs of things that you would need. So feel free to check them out. Marty now lives in the Boston area, although he's obviously very Australian, as you can tell by his accent. Probably the best sales call he ever had was marrying Kathy, Flood's wife. So he obviously had a good one there. And he's got two daughters, daughter Emma that runs the CEO Mentor, and daughter Olivia, who's in cybersecurity. And they are both based in Australia. So I'm sure you've got some off hours that you get to deal with.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And besides work and family, he is a struggling golfer, but excellent red wine connoisseur. So, and we've met a couple times through a good friend, Chris Riley, and definitely was impressive. And I think we originally booked this a year or so ago when I met you at Chris Riley's house. So how fast time comes along. So speaking of Chris, who's a great president of Data Robot now, I've got some great intro comments to use from him. He said there's several unique Marty-isms, but a couple he wanted to pull out is going off like a frog in a sock.
That's a very Aussie expression.
And dug in like a tick.
Dug in like a tick. Yep, absolutely.
So, he also goes on complimentarily. Marty's one of the most accomplished executives I've had the privilege of being around. His business acumen can only be matched by his Australian wit. Most importantly, he is a friend to many, coach and mentor to most. And if you are in that circle, consider yourself lucky. So that's pretty cool.
That's very, very nice words. And now I'll spend 57 minutes trying to live up to them, Randy. So thank you.
There you go. Awesome. So talking about your background, usually with guests, I'll say, talk about your first job out of college. But admittedly, you said you failed out of the University of Sydney. So maybe tell us a little bit about that. And then what was your first job from there?
Okay, Randy. It was actually an interesting story because I was living in Sydney. I was brought up there. And I'd spent 6 years in an all-boys boarding school, one of Sydney's top schools. But I came out of there and I was just so immature. I came out of a super structured environment and went into a completely unstructured environment at university and just did not handle it at all well. And so I think it was the two majors that I chose in my law degree that eventually brought me down. I had a double major, one in beer, one in rugby. And so they eventually got the better of me. And so I dropped out and I just, literally bummed around for about 2 years, just trying to work out what I wanted to do with my life, and eventually got into the burgeoning field of computer science. So I became a software developer way before it was cool. Way before saying a coder was a cool thing to be.
Back in the 80s.
Yeah, absolutely. Mid 80s. Yeah.
Wow, great. And then maybe go through your career from there.
Yeah, well, I got a job as a software developer in a bank because in those days it was obviously big business that was doing most of the work in computers. So I worked for them for a few years, and then I realized that the technical stuff was fun, but it wasn't where the real action was. So I became a project manager and managed to bounce around a bunch of different companies over probably 10 years in the 1990s until I decided to get serious about having a career, which was when I decided to take on my MBA. And I got my first job as a chief information officer at one of Australia's top 50 listed mining companies, a company called Mount Isa Mines.
Wow, awesome. And then from there, kind of how'd you get it, your progression, and obviously got into leadership and a fan of leadership?
Yeah, and I bounced around a lot of different industries, which is where my love for leadership developed, Randy, because, going from mining to insurance, to rail freight transportation, to energy, obviously very different industries, and I was going in fresh at the executive level each time. So what I worked out was because I wasn't particularly an expert in anything in particular, I had to get really good at bringing the best out of the people who were working for me. My very first job in the energy sector was chief executive of a multi-billion-dollar energy company. So, I went in there and the executive team's looking at me as if to say, what the hell are you doing here? Like, what do you know about energy? And, of course, I took my time to get to know them and bring out the best in them. But I said, it's going to take me 6 months to learn this thing well enough to operate. And in the meantime, just have a look at what I'm doing because maybe there's a reason why the board hired me. So let's work together and see what those complementary skills and capabilities are. So that was my leadership thing and my real passion, which was, capturing that upside that most companies leave on the table because they can't tap into the discretionary effort and stretch performance of the people who work for them.
Awesome. And then along the way there, you also had a sales leadership job for a railway company, right?
I did. And that company made the bulk of its income from hauling commodities like coal from the ports, from the mines in Queensland. So they're sort of, sometimes 200-300 miles inland out to the ports to ship them overseas, big export industry. And so we had the trains that carried the stuff and the contracts were all, huge contracts, multi-billion-dollar contracts with only a very small handful of customers. So, we had 20 customers really and only 7 of them mattered who were big enough to have those really big hauls. And so they were long lead negotiations. They were, 12, 18 months to lock in a 10-year contract in a competitive environment. So that was a really interesting sort of sales job to do.
Wow, that's great. And then when did you get going with your CEO mentor?
2018, so about 5 years ago. And my daughter, Emma, it was her idea. She started the business and she said to me, Dad, you're so much better than just being a CEO. I didn't quite know how to take that. But when I thought about it, Randy, let's face it, if I'm CEO, even if I'm CEO of, GE or Boeing or one of those massive companies, how many people do I directly impact in reality? Like maybe 100 and 50 of those don't want to be impacted. So I can have a lot more impact and a lot more reach doing what I'm doing now with, global podcast with, as many downloads as we've had in 150 countries. And I can just get to so many people and have such a much bigger impact doing what I'm doing.
Oh, awesome. And then along the way, there's probably some first big moment or aha when you said, okay, we actually have something here.
Yeah, there was. And it's funny because, Emma said to me, right, we're going to set this business up. And I said, well, that's awesome because I always wanted to write a book. So let's develop a book. And she just looked at me and said, Dad, a book is so 2010. We're not doing a book. So I said, well, what are we doing? And she said, well, we're going to start with a podcast. And we sort of toyed around with that idea for a while. But when she said to me, this business model means that you have to give away your best content for free, just freaked me out. So I put my arm around her shoulder and said, come on, darling, let your dad explain to you how business works.
Yeah.
But she convinced me about how the model works in terms of, putting that best content out there for free. 99% of people will never buy a single thing from you, but the 1% that do are mega fans that can't wait to give you their money.
Wow, that's awesome. And then kind of what are usually we've got more traditional tech sales folks. Your business model is obviously a little bit different, but kind of, what would you say in terms of kind of who you actually are selling to and, how do you bring in money?
Yeah, it's interesting because we have a very, very clear target audience and we target the mid-career leader, as we call them. And we went into a huge amount of thought and detail about what our sweet spot customer would look like. What actually happens is we get people when they've been leading for long enough to realize that it's harder than it looks, but they haven't been in it so long that they start to believe their own bullshit and think that they've got it all mastered. So we're catching them in that sweet spot of their career where they're trying to improve their skills to perform better. And how we make money is we have a whole range of products. We've got a product stack that starts with the top of the funnel, which is our free podcast. We have a number of, free downloadables on our website, masterclasses, little short video masterclasses and PDF downloadable things. But it all feeds into our paid product suite, which is, things like our evergreen courses. We do one for career executives called Landing Your Dream Job, which we're releasing shortly. But our flagship is an 8-week program called Leadership Beyond the Theory. And that's really the culmination of the No Bullshit Leadership Framework that you would have seen in the book. When I say people are ready to implement and they're ready to get serious about improving their leadership skills, this gives you the roadmap to do it, because it's very practical, right? It's based on my leadership experience, not on any theory, so to speak.
Gotcha. That's awesome. And then with your kind of go-to-market or kind of sales effort there, any particular challenges that you have or are having?
All the time. So we're beholden to the ad market largely. Obviously, we use Facebook, LinkedIn to advertise, as people do. And at different times, depending on what's going on, the targeting is either more or less accurate, and the conversion cost is, variable, as you know. So we've got a marketing team in Sydney that's looking at that all the time, and they are now extremely expert in how to actually manage that. But we live and die on our mailing list. So we use ActiveCampaign for our customer base. And we have a small, when I say small, maybe 50,000 people on our list, but it's really high quality. So anyone who hasn't opened our direct mails for, 3 months or something, we just take them off the list, just send them an email and say, hey, looks like you don't need us anymore. We're just going to remove you from our list. So we keep it pretty clean and very focused and targeted on people who are genuinely consuming our information. And we collect a lot of data and tag a lot of different things in there. So we can be very, very surgical about the information that we send out to different people. We can target, just founders of companies. We can target, anything you'd like to slice and dice that data up with. We do that with our marketing team in Sydney.
Wow. Awesome. Great. And for those watching along or listening, feel free to post any comments or any questions for Marty here as we go. So title topic, No Bullshit Leadership. Love the topic. Why did you come up with that as a name?
Well, we were trying to think of something that was snappy and described what we were doing. So that was the name we came up with for our podcast. And that was, way back in 2018 before we released our first episode in September. So, pretty much 5 years ago to the day. Emma and I were sort of planning this for about 6 months before we launched. And we went through, as you do when you're brainstorming this sort of stuff, a dozen different titles. And we're sitting around my pool in Brisbane one day, and I think it took 3 or 4 cocktails, but I eventually said, how about No Bullshit Leadership? And both of us just looked at each other and went, yes, that's it. And it was interesting because that was, it's good to have a catchy name, right? But the content's got to be good as well. Yes. You don't get far if the content's no good. People will go, oh, that's interesting. And then they get 3 minutes into an episode and never listen again. So it's a good thing to get people's initial interest peaked, which we found worked quite well. And when we decided to come over to the US and build our market here, because Australia, for your community that doesn't know Australia, it's a small country, right? It's physically the same size as the lower 48, but in terms of population, there's only 26 million people there, which is very different from having a 330 million person, country as you do over here in the US.
3 or 4 cities, really, depending upon how you count them. Yeah.
Exactly. There's Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane in that order on the East Coast. I'm convinced they only built Adelaide so the plane had somewhere to land on your way to wine country, and then Perth way over on the other side of the country. So it's like the distance between, LA and New York. So it's a hike. So yeah, it's only a small country, but we found that when we came over to the US, we had to think about the conversion, because of course we spell slightly differently. And writing my book to be published in the US market, so I got a New York-based agent, was published by Simon & Schuster over here. I'm writing everything in US-based English when I'm writing my book. And I've got to tell you, Randy, just a little piece of my soul died every day as I was writing, because I'm spelling in US English going, oh, but that's not right. But it's worked pretty well, and we've made the conversion. Everything we push out now is in US English. Interesting story about the title for the book, though, because I figured that people would be a little bit skittish about the swear word over here, because in Australia, we all swear like drunken sailors. In the US, not quite so much. So when we pitched the titles to our publisher, we didn't even pitch No Bullshit Leadership. We pitched a completely different set of titles, maybe half a dozen of them. And the publisher came back and said, no, I definitely want No Bullshit Leadership, the same as your podcast name. He said, that stands out. That's something that's going to differentiate you. So we said, okay, no problem at all. And then we started talking about subtitles for the book, because every book has a long subtitle. Even the really short titles, like Dan Pink's book, Drive, the subtitle is The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us, right? So they all have their long subtitles. But the publisher said to me, no, Marty, there's no subtitle on this book. And I looked at him and he said, anything that comes after the words no bullshit leadership is likely to be bullshit. So we're going to leave it where it is.
There you go. Awesome. And, lots of great nuggets in there, but I think it's kind of the main thing is around the 7 imperatives that you talk about with delivering value at the core. So maybe, different ways to explain value, but when you say delivering value at the core, what do you mean by that?
Value comes in all shapes and sizes, Randy, as you well know, and, customer intelligence, competitor intelligence, that can create value for you if you gather it. But the real thing that I thought was central to my model was, we've sort of lost that connection between leadership and performance. The process of leading with the need to get results and improve results just seemed to get lost over the last 10 or 15 years because, leadership just became all about, noble, desirable leadership attributes. So every time you hear someone who's an expert in leadership, they talk about humility and transparency and integrity and courage, all of which are fantastic things, right? But there was no connection at all between results. So people would listen to that stuff. They get motivated, they get inspired, and then they do absolutely nothing. And while they're feeling motivated and inspired, the people who work for them think that they're shit leaders and they won't respond to them and they won't work for them and they won't stretch themselves for them. So in this, desire to reconnect leadership with results, I put value at the center of the model. That's why you're being paid, right? Create value. You've got to know how it's defined.
Yeah.
Create value for your organization, no matter what.
Awesome. And so the first of the 7 is handle conflict.
Yeah, and I found that to be one of the biggest career killers for people. They just simply could not have a direct confrontational conversation with someone and remain calm and fearless and rational. It's just such a difficult thing to do because it goes against our human nature. So I found that was probably one of the biggest things that held a lot of leaders back from being as good as they could be.
Yeah, trick I found along the way, and I would have teams, I'd have thousands of people at some sales kickoffs, and I'd kind of go through this, say, let's practice saying, can I give you some feedback, right? Because nobody ever knows how to say, how can I conflict? How can you receive? How can you send? Yeah. So I just say, hey, Marty, can I give you some feedback? And then you're like, okay, I'm going to hear something. I may not like it. I'm going to be ready. Well, when you said this or did this, I thought maybe you could do this better or do that better, right? But having people practice and having that as a company culture, which I think en masse, companies don't do and leaders don't do, right? So you need to resolve conflict because enemies are outside, not inside.
Absolutely.
Second one you have is build resilience.
Yes, and resilience is pretty key. I think a lot of leaders, as they go through organizations and get higher and higher up, they get a natural level of resilience because you can't avoid it. You're getting stuff hitting you all the time, right? Obstacles, setbacks, disappointments. And you do tend to build a natural level of resilience. But I find that what that pushes most people to do is they get really good at putting their game face on. So they can look like they're completely calm under pressure. But you can still feel this disconnect because inside they're quite panicky. And so I talk about this feeling of grace under pressure where you're completely relaxed on the inside. It's like, for all you in the community here watching today who aren't New England's Patriots fans, you're probably not going to like this, but it's like Tom Brady when he walked on for that first set of downs in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. I had a look at his face. I reckon his pulse rate wasn't over 50, walking on for one of the biggest moments in his life, because that's a guy who could really handle pressure. He had grace under pressure, and you could see it in everything he did, in his body language, in the way he moved. So it's using the tools to get good enough under pressure that you have that complete congruence between what's happening on the outside and what's happening on the inside.
Totally. Probably helps that I think he played in as many Super Bowls as the whole Atlanta Falcons team had played in.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
By the way, getting honored this Sunday in Foxborough at the Eagles game. So third one is work at level.
Yes, and working at the right level is probably the most common mistake that de-optimizes team performance. And so when you're leading a team, it's very, very easy when you see someone not doing what they're supposed to do or not doing it to the right level of quality for you just to dip down and do it for them, because you're solving the problem, you're keeping your own technical skills up to date, and you can have this moniker of, I'm the guy who always delivers. And so it's very easy to go and compensate for someone else and do their job for them. The trouble is, as long as you're doing their job for them, you're not doing your own job. It's the first problem. The second thing is you never find out what people are capable of because you rescue them all the time.
Yep.
And the third thing is you can't build capability that way because you never stretch people and let them make mistakes, and you tidy up after them. So working at your level and doing the job you're paid to do at that right level without overcompensating for your people below you is a really important concept.
Oh, awesome. And then what are we here? Fourth one is connect the dots.
Yeah, so that's the last one. Master ambiguity is the next one. I'll connect the dots at the end because it's connecting all of it together. Right?
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
All right,
so mastering ambiguity is the next thing, and that's really just about, when you think about ambiguity and complexity in our environment, at the level of a CEO, there is no black and white at all. It's just 1,000 annoying shades of grey. That's all you see. But down on the front line, someone's got to know on that front line what they need to do right now, today, to be successful and to do a good job. And so somewhere between the very top where there's no certainty and the very bottom where they need complete certainty, that's got to be translated by leaders and communicated. So that master ambiguity is all about how do you actually absorb the ambiguity and sit in it comfortably while still giving clear direction to the people who work for you.
Awesome. And then make great decisions.
Yeah, and funnily enough, Randy, I think the biggest problem with decision making is that people are just too slow. So many decisions they just sit on because they want to perfect them. I need more data. I need more consultation. I'm not sure if this person's on board yet. How do I actually do this? And the moment passes. And so your team can slow down to glacial speed if you don't create this tempo of decision making where, momentum is just so important. It's so much more important than perfection. And so if you're driving for momentum, you can always adjust as you go. And your decisions don't have to be perfect. They just need to be, pretty good. If you look at the stats from any sort of sporting competition, PGA golfers, when they tee off, they only hit the fairway about 60% of the time, and that's the very best of them. And so 4 times out of 10, the ball doesn't go where they want, and it doesn't matter because they're consistently excellent. It's the same in baseball. If you get to first base 1 in 3 at bats, you're going to be in the top players of all time. So, understanding that it's okay to fail because that's part of the process. And you've just got to be consistently excellent with your decisions.
Yeah. And you also have a recently published Harvard Business Review article on how to make great decisions quickly. So would you subscribe that doing it quickly is better than maybe quickly and not perfect is better than waiting and having to take longer and then maybe be a more perfect decision?
For sure. Absolutely, Randy. And I think, in that article for Harvard Business Review, I actually spoke about the decision-making framework, like what makes a good decision. And there's 8 elements to it, the final one being speed. And so you can go through those other elements and say, okay, I've checked this box, right? I've got enough information. I've consulted enough people of the right type. It's not consensus decision-making. They're the worst decisions. But I've spoken to the right people who can actually add value to it. I've thought about the holistic impacts. I've looked at short-term and long-term implications. So you can go through this checklist and do it really, really quickly and still make a great decision.
So you said there, consensus. I think today's kind of day and age, people are they're more kind of pleasers, want to do what people want and all that stuff. So talk a little bit more about why consensus is bad. Okay.
So Randy, kill me now, right? Consensus is just poison in your organization because you're trying to get everyone's opinion fed into the final decision. And what you end up with is this Frankenstein's monster, right? Just stitched together. You get a decision that everyone can live with, but no one's happy with. And you couldn't find one person that thought it was actually the right decision. And so the consensus decision takes a really long time to arrive at. And because it's been a process of compromise, you're just driving it down to the lowest common denominator. And that's not going to give you the best decision ultimately. And that's why this ties in so well with the final piece, which is accountability. If you drive accountability, you've got one person who's making a decision. They're accountable for it. One head to pat, one ass to kick. They both belong to the same person. And if you can do that, you'll get awesome decisions made in the right time frame by the right person. And that's what you're after. That's execution, like supercharging.
Awesome. And then now we conclude it with the connecting the dots.
Yeah, because all of those concepts are a little bit isolated. They do connect, but when you see the day-to-day things that you need to do to make them happen, so how do you actually roll out changes to your team? If you actually think you want to do something different, how do you take it to them? How do you get them on board? how do you manage someone's performance so that you're lifting them to get the best out of them? And I'm not talking about underperformers. I'm talking about, your best performers. When they come in every day, they'll give you maybe 80, 85% on any given day. If you can lift them, they don't give you 10% more than your average. They give you 200% more than your average. So how do you actually stretch everyone to get the best of their individual capability out of them? So that sort of stuff's in connect the dots, yeah.
Awesome. But then also now in this kind of wacky Zoom kind of day and age, it's one thing if you're all in the office together in teams, or even if there's remote teams, but people at least are together now where they're kind of so spread out and there's this quiet quitting and all that. Kind of any words of wisdom there?
Yeah, I don't know if I've got any wisdom, Randy. I've certainly got some observations though. Okay. There are lots of things that can be done from home and remotely. There's no problem at all. And anyone who's in a sales job is on the road a lot and still having to be productive and get work done. There's no doubt about that. But there's a lot of things that get lost if you don't actually spend time together in a team. You can't do talent management and capability building remotely. You can't create culture remotely. Or you'll have, there's a culture everywhere, but you're going to have 1,000 different cultures based on what the individual's doing. There's a whole range of things you simply can't do. Innovation is harder. You don't get as much creativity and sharing of information. So what I say is, hybrid work is a reality. It's here for good. It's not going to change now. The thing about it is when you do get the opportunity to bring people together, you've got to be deliberate. You've got to use the time well. You can't just have people sitting in and saying, glad you're in the office today, have at it. You've got to have a purpose and a reason, and you've got to be super productive while you have that opportunity.
Oh, awesome. And then other concept in the book is the LBT, Leadership Beyond Theory, that takes kind of these 7 from kind of understanding to more practical implementation.
Yeah, and this is really our flagship product. So all of the stuff that comes through our free podcast funnel eventually ends up with people who actually want to commit and really make a difference to how they lead, and they join our 8-week leadership program. So that's Leadership Beyond the Theory, 1 week per module. At the end of each week, I'll do webinars to answer questions. I answer everyone's questions, so we keep the number of participants small because I guarantee to answer everyone's question. And this is where you really get the tools and techniques and the daily pressure that says, okay, we take this and implement it, right? There's 100 things here you might be able to do, but pick 2 or 3 things that are going to really change the way that you get your results and just dive into those and have a go at them, and we're here to help you. So it's mainly delivered, digitally through, video and downloadables. But yeah, there's also a hybrid, in-person component, which I do via these types of webinars to make sure that everyone gets their context by answering questions.
Gotcha. Interesting. So I've got kind of a theory that maybe a little cynical, but it seems like the broader younger generation these days has kind of less of a desire to improve and learn and go and grow, which may be slanderous to some, but back when we were kind of growing up, you're all over learning, developing everything you can get from anybody. And, you'd be, kind of be looking in the mirror and checking and all that. And it seemed, you sense that things are kind of different kind of now with maybe the 20 and 30-year-olds versus kind of what it might have been 20 years ago? Oh,
yeah, definitely, Randy. But now you and I are going to sound like a couple of, old white guys talking about this, which is fine. I think the thing I've noticed is that the young people are very ambitious, but they've probably been given things too easily. And I think that the concept of, the 9th place trophy and the, every child wins a prize, and even to the extent of not keeping scores in games, that sets them up with unrealistic expectations. And I think the challenge for leaders is that when they take these people on board, that they actually help to give them that reality and say, okay, look, this may have been the way you were brought up for your first, 23, 24 years, but the reality isn't actually that. And if you want to be successful, let's talk about what that might take. And I've had young people say to me, well, Marty, there's no way I'll ever work as hard as you. I've gone, no problem. Just don't expect the same results. Your call. Whatever you want to do, cupcake. But if you don't want the results, don't do the work. That formula has not changed, and it won't change.
Right. Exactly. I do a post, which is I might be old school, but in the work ethic, I think was Tucker could correct me. I think the work ethic one was a week or 2 ago. Then the one this week was on the desire to learn. Coincidentally enough, and then you also talk about career accelerators that can't be learned in business school.
Yeah, and I think there are no silver bullets to this stuff. We know that it is about the right disciplines and the right habits, and we all know how easy it is to develop bad habits, Randy, and how difficult it is to develop good habits. But if you dedicate yourself to that and you understand the really core principle here, which is that motivation follows action, not the other way around. And we all know that, right? But it takes us a few years to learn. So if you can actually drum that into someone at a much earlier age, they'll have a much better chance of seeing the opportunities that are there and getting themselves into the right frame of mind that they can be successful and see them when they arise. So I think that, do it until it feels okay, not do it because it feels okay.
Gotcha. There you go. And of course, getting feedback along the way whenever you can from anybody's helpful, right?
Oh, for sure. And I mean, the number one thing about learning to lead better is to have that level of self-awareness. And I was terrible when I first started leading. I was awful because I was so arrogant and it was all about me proving how good I was. And that was okay. Like I got by okay on that for a few years. But it just dawned on me one day how incredibly ineffective my leadership was. I just wasn't getting any real value and delivery out of the teams that were working for me. So I really changed my tune on it. If it wasn't for that, just that tiny little bit of self-awareness, I could be just as bad today, theoretically. so it's critical you got that. You got the ability to just look at your navel and say, maybe I didn't do that well, or maybe I need to get better in this area.
Yeah, totally. And I've got, probably you like me, several pet peeves, but one is, leaders that, say I, and I'd argue anytime you say I, you can say we. And it just, anytime I hear that, I just totally tune out. And then whenever I hear or see, then I try and circle back and give people feedback. But I mean, that just is such a, turn off right away, don't you think?
Oh, it absolutely is. And I don't know how widespread this is, but I use this little nickname for people. I call them the optometrist. And I call them the optometrist because every time they open their mouth, it's I. So we see someone like that, we go, there's an optometrist.
There you go. All right, I'll have to use that one. And you also have lots of great information on how to become a C-level executive. So any 2 or 3 nuggets in particular?
I think absolutely. This really touches on the concept of working at level, Randy, because to do the job that you want to do, a lot of people think that being a workhorse is the way to do it. And we both know work ethic is critical. It's a chip into the game. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. But a workhorse is someone who does everything they get told to do without question. They just put their head down and get away and do it. And they work longer and harder than anyone else. So no one's going to stop them from doing that. But they don't push back. They don't question. They don't add value at the broader level. They just get in and do what they're told. So they're good soldiers, right? And I think the difference between a workhorse and a trusted advisor is really, really obvious. And a trusted advisor who's someone who thinks above their level, not below their level, they are thinking about the breadth of issues that are relevant and important to their boss, not the breadth of issues that are relevant and important to the people who are supposed to be doing the work that they're being paid to do below them. So I think that's one of the key things is think like a trusted advisor and not a workhorse. Relationships, of course, are absolutely critical in anything. So building a level of credibility and respect beyond your direct line of managers so that you have, when they do talent management sessions in large companies, as you know, they sit around the table talking about people and you'll have a bunch of different executives who the reporting line doesn't go through who will have an opinion. And so when those conversations come up, I always want them to say, oh yeah, Marty Moore's solid. I don't want a guy from left field who I don't know well enough saying, well, I'm not sure about him. The only time I saw him, he cracked an inappropriate joke, which I want to do. So I think developing relationships is critical. And I think one thing that I've found held me really in good stead during my career was that I never cared about the job. And when I say I never cared about it, I never cared enough about the job to compromise what I thought was the right thing to do. So even if I was going to piss someone off at a higher level, I was okay to do that because I thought, if this company doesn't value my fearless contribution, then it's not the right place for me to work. So not being wed to my job, not being insecure about the possibility of losing my job was super liberating, because then I could do what I thought was right at the right time because it needed to be done. And that gave me a huge amount of power that a lot of my peers didn't have because they were too shy or too scared to use their voice, even though they might have thought the same as me.
For sure. Just thinking on the kind of talent management side, you'd mentioned around people sitting around tables. So for those that don't know, at pretty much any senior executive level, they'll have. So I would run meetings. I'd have my Chris Riley and other direct reports, and kind of we'd go through people's teams. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, but you have a typical one would be you have kind of I call a 9 box where you track. Okay, here's Marty's performance, and here's what his potential is. Right. So if you're somebody that's high performing, high potential, great. If you're somebody who has high potential, maybe low performance, okay, you work it. If you have somebody that's low on both, then you got another issue. And also stack ranking is another common theme. So where possible, I would suggest everybody try and ask their boss, hey, where am I in your either stack ranking chart, or Randy talked about this 9 box thing or anything like that. So you get the discussion going. And then what's probably so number one, kind of where you stand and know that happens. But then even more important is, as we talked about before, getting feedback is saying, okay, what is it that I can do different and better? If the group says, okay, it's not that strong, but it's new news to you, a lot of times people will get upset with their boss. But I would argue you should be the one really pulling that out, because maybe they're uneasy about it. Any views there?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Andy. And one of the really important things for me about talent management and, using the 9 box process and stack charts is pretty common in larger organizations, is that I always felt as though as a leader, I had an obligation to tell people where they actually sat. So I would schedule meetings after a talent management session, which we ran, I think, 6 monthly in most of the larger organizations I was in. And I would sit down with my direct reports and expect them to do the same with their people. So anyone who was being spoken about, I wanted them to know. They had visibility of their performance rankings, because that was part of the performance evaluation process, but not necessarily how they were viewed in terms of their potential. And you can end up with all sorts of problems if you've got a mismatch between someone's ambition, or where they think they sit in the pecking order, and where the rest of the organization at the highest level sees them. And so just getting that level of connection and clarity and consistency between how you each think is super, super important. And then that feeds into a development plan. Okay, well, if you want to be here, if you want to be a general manager, here's the sort of stuff you're going to need to improve. Here's the sort of education you'll need. Here's the experience you'll need. How can we get you there? And some conversations are much harder. You want to be a general manager? Not in your lifetime, sunshine, unfortunately. So let's talk about what the best career path for you is, because you're clearly a very, very technically focused person who will struggle to break out of that. So let's find a better path for you. So all of that stuff comes from talent management. And if you do it properly and give people insight into what's being said about them, they respond super, super well, even if the news isn't good. People love clarity more than they hate bad news.
Totally. And I also found a lot of times people leave the top performers alone, work on the bottom performers, but I'd argue the top performers are the ones that yearn for the feedback. And by the way, you're going to get a smidgen of an uptick from a top performer in performance brings huge value versus somebody who's maybe struggling. You still have to go through to try and help them, but there's really huge value in helping the top performer. And by the way, by doing that, that's probably one of the best things you can do in terms of really retaining them and making them happy with kind of what they're doing, how they're doing it. And then other thing I chime in is, as a leader as well, I'd say, okay, what's the feedback for me? So it's not just the feedback toward the individual, but hey, what do you like what I'm doing? What can I do different or better? And you have to kind of lead by example. And it's really hard to do it in these organizations because, to your point before, there's too much ego and everything else that's going on, right?
Totally. And I have an expression that I think captures this pretty well. It's a lot easier to rein in a stallion than it is to flog a donkey. And we spend a lot of time flogging donkeys, don't we? And the top performers get demotivated. They look at that and they go, really? Like, that's the standard? It's down there, is it? So, I can cruise along at 40%. I'm still going to be way above that. Exactly. If that person keeps coming in Monday and getting paid, well, I'm safe.
Totally. And as far as I know, they may not sound clean, but those are all clean analogies. So interpretation there. So again, just a reminder, we got Marty Moore from your CEO Mentor. If anybody watching and listening wants to ask any questions or make any comments, please feel free. So we spoke about before ego, kind of the silent killer of success. Any other killers?
Yeah, I think that conflict aversion is an absolute career killer. ego is a killer, and self-interest. And we're all programmed for self-interest. This is the most interesting thing in my mind about leadership, is because you've got to do a bunch of stuff that completely goes against the programming, right? The reptile brain saying, danger, 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 run away, fight, flight, or freeze, right? So that's what you're getting out of that. And then instead, you've got to actually step into it willingly and consciously to do things that need to be done. So as you know, negotiation by its nature is an adversarial construct. And so you're in for conflict there. But so many people lose it in negotiations who are technically really good negotiators, really smart commercial heads, and they blow a negotiation because they can't keep their cool. They get angry or upset or apprehensive, and they lose the plot. And you surely have seen that, Randy, as I have many, many times. And if it was the same person with a better temperament, their negotiation outcomes would be inordinately better, like orders of magnitude better.
Absolutely. And I guess being a good negotiator plays into success of a leadership as well, correct? Because you're going to be negotiating internally, externally, kind of everywhere, right?
Absolutely. And when you look at my framework, it's really focused on the leadership skills, but there's a whole range of competence level capabilities that sit underneath that. So you've first got to be a competent business leader, right? You've got to be a competent business person. And so you've got to have negotiation skills. You've got to have good commercial acumen. You've got to understand the numbers, right? I know a lot of leaders who simply don't understand the numbers and think that's finance's problem. The same way a lot of leaders think that, any people issues they have is an HR problem. So it's not. You're a line manager, manage appropriately. And, negotiation, commercial acumen, finance, communication, critical. Everyone in every business should have some marketing nous. I don't care who they are or what business it is, a not-for-profit, I don't care. Having some level of marketing nous, I think, is critical in being able to do any job inside a company.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you also have some good perspectives on work-life balance as well.
Yeah, and this is my Achilles heel, Randy. So I don't feel like I'm standing on solid ground when I talk about this, but I think the concept of work-life balance just is. I think it's a misnomer. I think it's not the right expression. When we're talking about balancing work and life, and I think, post-COVID, this has shown us this in spades, is that there is just life. And you've just got to fit everything in. And I'm the type of person and personality where I can only focus on one thing really, really solidly at any given point in time. So I've had times in my life where I've been focused on my health and fitness. I've been running marathons. I've been doing all sorts of things. And my career has just ticked away on the back burner. There's other times when I've focused on my career so much that I've risked my health. And I just like the analogy and the metaphor of the guy in the circus who's spinning the plates on top of the poles. And you've just got all these plates spinning on top of poles, and you're over here, and all of a sudden, there's one just about to stop spinning and fall off the pole over there. So you run over there and you give it a bit of energy, and then you come back. And I find that my life typically is like that, not as extreme, but of course that's the concept of it. So managing life, putting your focus and attention in the right place at the right time on the important things, not the things that just happen to be capturing your attention at the moment, that seems to be a bit of a key and a bit of a secret for me, at least.
Oh, awesome. What about dealing with office politics when you're not in that face-to-face environment like we used to be?
Yeah, it's even harder now because you can't see the upwards managers who are sucking up to the boss in their office. It happens much more surreptitiously now. It was always hard because you never know who's saying what. And I always took the view that I needed to be aware of politics, but I would never play politics. And it brought me undone probably more than once because I was blinded or I didn't have visibility of what was going on politically. I just figured, do a good job, do the best job, deliver what I need to deliver and overperform, and everything else follows from there. It'll just be enough to hush any voice that is contrary or conflicting. And it wasn't always the case. It's not. And larger organizations can be highly political and they can be quite destructive. And if a boss can't see that they've got an upwards managing politician getting in their ear, then, you've got trouble. So I think the awareness of who's doing what, who has the contact hours, You've got to listen for cues that come from your boss and the people above. When they start talking about certain things, you go, oh, actually, that's interesting. I wonder how they formed that opinion. And questioning those things more and making sure that you're just aware of where the wind is blowing, I guess, from which direction. And that's very, very tricky, even when you're all in the same space, let alone, having done it remotely. Unfortunately, I haven't been in a large organization since COVID, so I haven't had to deal with it.
There you go. And then the whole topic, operational excellence. I mean, that's, can talk forever about that. Any kind of secrets there you'd share?
Operational excellence, in my mind, Randy, is really about having the right culture. And it's the culture of excellence over perfection, continuous improvement, that, better, faster, cheaper, and questioning what's there. I went into some industrial businesses to work as an executive where they'd been doing the same thing the same way for decades. And to just go in and ask the dumb questions, like, hey, I'm probably wrong, treat me like a 5-year-old, but can you explain why we do this way? And asking those questions is super important. Now, in one company I ran, I had a great operational excellence initiative because we found out that one of the power stations that was part of our portfolio, the workforce was super, super low productivity, like super low. We called in a consulting firm who were experts in operational excellence reform, and they went and did what they called DILOs, day in the life of. So they do the day in the life of an electrical fitter. They do a day in the life of a maintenance team. And they just follow them around. It's almost like a stopwatch, time and motion study, right? And the figures they came out with were absolutely astounding. There was one particular team they found who had a tool time, so in other words, productive at work time in 1 week of 12%. So 88% of their time was spent on stuff that wasn't directly contributing to what they were supposed to be paid to do. And so once you've got these sorts of numbers and you've got some sort of basis for comparison, you can sort of say to the teams, okay, guys, don't know about you, but I'm not thinking this is top quartile, so let's have a think about how to go about it. So it's understanding the need for change, communicating the need for change, having the means to change it. So get someone to come in and say, right, how about we do this differently? Question everything. Question the processes, the procedures, the people, the leadership, the whole lot, and you will lift it really quickly. Now, the trouble with it is that it takes constant focus and commitment. And in this particular case I'm talking about, when I left the organization as CEO, within 12 months, those teams that we completely reformed and got them from, an average of maybe less than 30% tool time up to the 75 to 80% tool time, slipped way back, right? Because it didn't have that constant focus and attention and commitment.
Wow. It's amazing. And when we were prepping, you said something I thought was great. You said best reps don't always make the best leaders, but the best leaders are usually always great salespeople.
Yeah, and I find this a little bit of a conundrum because something happens in between, right? So I think the thing about the really, really great salespeople is that they are fiercely competitive. They are so driven. They are almost by definition lone wolves, even though they rely on a lot of people around them, because to be that good with that high level of performance, you actually need to focus solely on what you're trying to achieve. And so I think that creates a set of behaviors that is fantastic in the sales environment. And these people are just going to be topping the numbers every year and winning the trips to Hawaii and getting all the awards and making the big bonuses. And that's exactly what you want, right? That's why you get salespeople in. And salespeople who are great at their jobs are just worth their weight in gold. But not many of them convert really well to being great leaders because that same set of characteristics and behaviors doesn't wash well when you're trying to lead a team, because you've got to have connection and empathy and understanding and focus and time spent on the individual as opposed to the goal. So more people focused than task focused. And so a lot of salespeople don't convert well into sales leader and CEO roles. However, every single great leader I know, and there aren't too many of them, are all unbelievable salespeople. Their ability to communicate and influence and listen and pull out the most important and relevant details in a conversation and play them back and win people's approval and acceptance. I mean, it's masterful to watch. So I find it a little bit of a paradox, actually, that's the way the world works.
Wow, that's great. And a bunch of us that grew up at EMC, theoretically, were strong in the sales side. Then I think it's probably do you have the potential? Do you want to be coachable? Do you want to go into leadership?
Yeah.
If you do, then you got to make sure you kind of get rid of some of those attributes. Maybe great for some of these leadership attributes, right?
Absolutely. And I think what you said there, Randy, is so insightful because we're talking about the conscious choice. And a lot of organizations don't actually give the conscious choice. So EMC is obviously a great organization. But when you think about, a salesperson, they say, you're a great salesperson. Let's promote you to here. Oh, promotion? More money? Sure. More power? Sure. And they don't really think through what that means. So just having that little pause to say, let's make a conscious choice here. Let's be deliberate about it. Where do you want to be?
Yeah, I think financial services, I think, does that a lot where they've got strong individual contributors, they promote them up, and then awful as leaders, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So now turn the tables back on you. I'm sure you've had some good mentors over the years. Any kind of fond advice that you can recall?
Oh, heaps. I mean, the mentors I tended to have later in my career, I worked out how to cherry pick really well. And so instead of having a mentor who I'd go to from time to time, I would have specific mentors in different areas where I knew I needed a little bit of help from time to time. So, for example, I had a mentor who was purely industrial relations and unions. And he was a guy who had, been brought up on the waterfront wharves in Sydney, loading ships at the age of 16, worked his way up, become an executive, led a huge waterfront reform in the late 90s. There was no trick that the unions could play that this guy hadn't actually either been involved in or seen from the executive level. So, and I was terrible with the unions because I won't say often, Randy, I was terrible at something. I was terrible at this, right? Because I didn't have the patience. I could not sit there and listen to some of the shenanigans that the union organisers would come out with. It would drive me nuts. My blood would boil. And I know I'm trying to be a better person, but in this case, I found it really hard. So when this stuff was going on, I just call this guy and I'd say, hey, Bob, can we get a coffee or lunch next week, mate? Can you put aside an hour for me? I just need to talk you through this. And he was just invaluable in being able to give me a different perspective that I couldn't see because I was blind to it. I was, everything looked opaque. I couldn't work out why they were doing stuff. And he would say, well, what they're trying to do is this. So they're saying that, but that's not their goal. Their goal is this over here. And that sort of insight and wisdom is so hard to come by. And so I found a couple of people who I could rely on in industrial relations, in commercial matters, particularly M&A, divestments, that sort of stuff where I wasn't strong, and completely invaluable.
Wow, that's great. What about anything for advice that you would give your younger self?
Yeah, I mean, relax. Okay, it's going to be okay. You got nothing to prove. It's going to be okay. Keep doing what you're doing. Take more risk. You don't have to be so risk averse. Just have a go. Yeah, I was quite risk averse as a younger person, thinking about what a career path should look like, and thinking about the traditional methods of doing certain things, and working in a way that I think was good. I mean, obviously I managed to get by, but I think it could have been much faster if I had less inhibitions about what I was doing. It's not about me; it's about other people. And if you can actually bring out their best, you'll do really well.
So when you're younger, especially 20s and 30s, theoretically, you got less to lose. So take the risk. When Absolutely. You get old guys like us, then you maybe not so much. But so if you're younger, now, I mean, when we were growing up, right, you had to stay at a company for 5 years. If you didn't, what's wrong with you now, you can change jobs every year, and that's totally fine, right? So try it. You don't like it, no big deal, right?
Totally. And Randy, I don't know if I'm learning from my mistakes or not, because here I am at the ripe old age of 56, deciding to set up a new business, which is super high risk, where there are zero barriers to entry, and it's the most crowded market on the planet. And I was a head of strategy for a company in the past, and the strategist inside me is going, "Oh, that's so dumb! Like, don't do it."
Right.
But it's working out okay.
Oh, awesome! What about is there any sales leader or sales leaders that you respect?
Well, I think based on the principle that, yes, the best leaders are also great salespeople, a couple come to mind. I mean, our friend Chris Riley, I've never heard other people talk about a leader with such respect and reverence and clear admiration as they do for Chris. And I've never worked for him, but I tell you what, I would love to. Because when I see the sorts of people he turns out, both in terms of their performance and their character, I think that's a rare thing. So I think that's actually quite a great example, really close to home for us. But I look at other people. A guy I worked for years ago, his name's Paul Scurrah. He ran Australia's second largest airline, Virgin Australia, for a number of years. And he was just a brilliant leader who could, I'm not sure if I can say this anymore, sell snow to an Eskimo. Yeah. He was just unbelievable. He could convince anyone of anything, and he had such a beautiful nature that nothing he said was offensive. He could be direct and assertive without actually ever putting anyone offside. And he just had that a beautiful element of connection and personal humility that really made it all work. And so he was just an unbelievable salesperson, taught me a huge amount about, selling in the large, long tail B2B deals, because he was so good at that. And he had all the strategy that sat behind it as well. It wasn't just his personality. So those are the two that come to mind.
There you go. Paul, there you go. All right. Well, it's been great. Time flies when you're having fun. I thank Tucker behind the scenes. As always, thank you for your help. Marty Moore, you've been awesome. Your CEO mentor and the great title, the No BS leader. And Sandler, thanks for being the sponsor. And if you're not a member of Sales Community, feel free to go ahead and join. So Marty, great job. Thanks. Appreciate it.